Oh man, I don't know if you guys are ready for this one. In today's episode of the Hart Hustle podcast, I sit down with Steven Steers, the owner and founder of Steers Consulting. More importantly, an entrepreneurial brother, someone who truly understands what it takes to make something of yourself in this life. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the mindset that comes along with success. We're going to talk about overcoming challenges, how you overcome having a dumpster of oil spilled all over you on your first day on the job, walking home in the cold through New York City, and the eventual move to Mexico to make yourself happy, but more importantly, to make your parents proud. We're going to dive into a lot of different conversations in today's episode. Let's stop wasting time. Let's get into it. Entrepreneurship is being used as a vehicle for freedom. And the definition of freedom, from my perspective, continues to change, because my first goal was all I want to do is not work this 9-to-5 job. And if I had control over my schedule, I'd be happy. And then I was like, okay, I have control over my schedule. Now I'm happy. But all I really want to do is accomplish growing my business to a certain amount of monthly revenue. Then I accomplished that and I was like, yeah, this is great. But what if I had the ability to pay for all of my family stuff? Do that. Now, what if I had the ability to start setting some money away so I could start putting a nest egg for like the next generation? Start doing that. But what about all these other people who are most successful and they have different business models, like in the software space? I wish I had that, accomplished that. It's just like, it's a continuous evolving door. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it is. But I think if we take it back as well, I think that's probably the most beautiful part about it. And what I say to anybody who's thinking about entrepreneurship or has started entrepreneurship, the coolest part to me is, like, for me, is the man it's made me become. Right? I have to ask myself really hard questions. I have to be super accountable for things. Like, I have to get help when I don't necessarily think I want help. But I have to be very honest with myself in a specific way, because it's all on me in a lot of ways. And I think it's good to hear that it's evolving, because that means you've accomplished your goals. I remember, like, years and years ago, I remember when I saved my first $10,000. I thought I was a billionaire, dude. Like, coming from nothing, like, oh, I got my first 10K, and I would track every penny I would spend and every penny that I would make. And I saw that, like, the next pay stub, I was going to hit 10K. And then I rushed home to enter it into the spreadsheet, and I was like, oh, I got 10K. And it's like, I felt no different, right? And I call that kind of goal depression, right? Like, you hit your goal and then, like, what now? And I think the journey as an entrepreneur is finding out those actual things that really fulfill you outside of the business in who you become. And so it's not necessarily as attached to a number or a thing, which is a constant process. And I'm still learning about myself, for sure.
Yeah, man, I've heard the saying that entrepreneurship is like the ultimate self-discovery process. It's almost like a mirror. We look at ourselves consistently every single day, face to face with the mirror, and we see the inefficiencies that we have, but we also see all the areas in which we can grow. And one of my favorite sayings is, what got you here will not get you there. And I constantly am reminded of that in the entrepreneurship journey. The skill sets, the character traits, everything continues to stack, gets me here, but I realize that I have to continue to evolve to get to the next place. I feel like this is a really good opportunity for us to kind of like roll into the episode. So everybody who's been, listening so far, I've got my guy, Steven Steers, here across from me. We're going to be talking about the power of storytelling today. Steven is the president of Steers Consulting Group. He is currently a program facilitator and trainer at Mindcraft Consulting, and is previously a business advisor at Legendary Podcast, man. So thank you so much for joining this podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Keenan. It's great to be with you, and I'm glad we could finally connect. All the technical difficulties in the world have been trying to keep us apart, but we're here on this Friday, which is dope.
Hey, man. I mean, it's a beautiful gift to be able to share the space, and I would like to share this digital table together as we kind of get into this. One of the cool traditions that we have about the podcast is I love being able to connect you with a previous guest, and the way in which we do that is by asking a question that came from our previous guest. Now, this individual is named Jenna. She is the founder of her own capital group. She also is a co-founder in a company called Savvy, which is a marketplace that is designed to create a safe space of vetted, I would say, vendors for women in the financial world, because 1 in 4 women is the victim of a financial crime at one point in their life. And so they have a mission to eradicate I would say, things that are getting taken advantage of when it comes to women's finances. And so it's a really cool thing. But she wants to ask you a question. And she says, I would love to know, What is the biggest challenge or darkest moment of your career that you've overcome?
Darkest moment. I can think of like two or three. Uh, which one would be most relevant for the audience? Let me see. So I'll give it dealer's choice here, Keenan. So I could talk about one of the darkest moments in my life before I really got into entrepreneurship that just got me there. I could talk about what made me leave New York and move to Mexico, which was a very challenging time. Or I could talk about the time I almost died, which got me into entrepreneurship.
Ooh. I want to say I want to hear the origin story. Let's kind of talk about the beginning, and then we can actually sprinkle everything else in as we kind of go through this process together.
Sure. So without dating myself too much, I graduated during the last recession, so like around 2009 era, 2010 era, and I moved back to New York City. That's where I'm from. Moved in with my parents. Thankfully, they had a little space for me in the house I grew up in, and I was applying for jobs like a crazy person, just doing everything I could, not getting responses. I think I probably applied to like 10, 20 a day, standard stuff. Nothing's happening. So my eldest brother was like, "Well, you need a job, so like, why don't you just go walk around to bars and restaurants and ask if they need help?" And I was like, "All right, I guess." I remember pulling up to a bar in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and just standing outside of it and feeling so ashamed that I'd have to go in and ask for work. That's how entitled I was back then at 20. Like everybody, 22, everybody tells you, "Oh, they're going to be knocking down your door to hire you because you went to this university." A big lie. But I remember standing out there and I was like, "I don't want to do this," and I had this like knot in my stomach. I was so nervous and upset. And eventually I was like, well, this ain't gonna happen if you don't do anything. So I went in there, dropped off a resume really fast. Do you need somebody? I don't know. And I just dropped it and ran. Did that for about a week and finally got my bones of being able to ask, right? I think also the lesson here too, any entrepreneur, any person, always have an ask because it shows what your thesis is for yourself. You can share that with people and then they can be thinking about the things you need as well and how to potentially plug you into other places. It extends your reach and your ability. So anyway, applied to a bunch of places, and within the following week I had two offers to be a janitor, a bar back in a bar, which is whatever. It paid cash, which was nice, and I was able to get some cash to do pay my student loans and some beer money or whatever. One of the days I worked was a Sunday, so I'd have to go into this bar in Williamsburg called the Charleston. They had it's on North 7th and Bedford, and they had a Cajun restaurant. And so I would go in there Sunday at 8 p.m. and work till 4 a.m. And my first job was to take out the trash. And they didn't take out the trash on Friday, all day Saturday, or all day Sunday. So I had a gang of trash, a ton. So I get there at 8 and like I'm kind of ashamed to be taking out the trash, like in case somebody sees me. So I do it first thing so that there's no problems. And so I go into the back and it's this little alleyway off the back of the bar. And it's like 6 trash cans deep and they're stacked 3 high, basically. So it's like 45 minutes of moving trash. So I'm taking bags out, bags out, bags out, whatever. And I get down to the last bag. And if you were to walk out in the alley, you would see this 55-gallon drum of old fryer oil. You'd see a shelf where you would put the old beer bottles. And then you'd have this tiny alleyway. So I get down to the last bag of trash and it's not coming out. It's just not. It's stuck there. And I'm just like, what the hell, man? Come on, like, come on. And so I pull, nothing's happening. And then finally, like, I pull up my pants and I squat down as hard as I can. And I just pull as hard as I can and it comes out. And there was a handle of liquor in there, which is why it was stuck. And as I pull that out, the handle of liquor catches the 55-gallon drum of fryer oil, knocks it over onto me and into the bar.
Oh,
And so like, I don't know, I saw it all in slow motion and you get that like sweat when you just messed up. And as everything just starts to go into the bar, I'm covered in oil on half of my body. I have a trash bag. I was like, yo, I quit. I'm going to quit. Like I'm done. And then as I dropped the bag of trash to go tell the bartender, I was like, oh, I don't have another job. I don't have anywhere else to go. There's nothing else I can do right now. I have to keep this job. And I just got so depressed, like right in that moment. Like I was just so sad that I had nothing else I could go do. But somewhere, like on the walk from the alleyway to the bar, I was like, nah, use use this. This is going to be an important part of your story. Like just own this, go do what you got to do, clean it up, everything. And that was the lowest point of my life. Hopefully that continues to be the lowest point of my life because I had no options. And I was just like, yo, I'm going to make something out of this life. This will be the first brick in my wall. And so that's probably one of the toughest things I ever went through. And I've come a long way since there.
I think that's fair to say. It's very interesting to me that we have these life experiences that kind of put us against a wall, if you will, especially when we're younger, right? We have that sense of entitlement, which you talked about, 20 years old, want to go find a job, think that the world's going to come to us. And then very quickly, life has an interesting way of reminding us that you have to go out and get it. And often that means putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations and asking for a job. And that's a big, scary process for a lot of people today. I know that there's an interesting tone and tenor, if you will, kind of across the media or the world of social media, where it seems like there's a interesting sense of entitlement. And I'm not coming from a place of judgment when I say entitlement for a younger generation, but it seems like we are consistently fed images and ideas that by the time you're 22, 23 years old, you're going to be a millionaire. And that is a tiny percent of individuals who often are selling a course
Yes.
or maybe kind of getting it done in a way that isn't the best from a long-term reputation perspective. And so I love to kind of hear your origin story because we've all had those stories. We've all had those moments where we have the ability to say, I quit, but then we have a realization of I don't have any other options. And you can either dive because of that, or you can do exactly what you said in realizing that this is going to be one brick in my story. And man, it's going to make such a better story at the end of the day. And I kind of consistently remind myself of that in the entrepreneurial journey, that you do have to remind yourself that this is all part of your story. And the stories we're telling and sharing are the ones that have the ups and downs.
Yeah, I think that's what makes you human, right? That's why people want to work with you and your company and your people versus somewhere else. Like we're humans solving human problems in a business context. And I think knowing where you came from and being able to show where you came from to people, it's like, oh man, like you did that and you're here now. It's like, yeah, I did that. You can do that too. And I think that's the connection we're all looking for. But man, social media, I'm so glad I didn't come up with it. I'm so glad. I feel bad for these kids a lot because comparison is the thief of joy. And social media is all about comparison. And I couldn't imagine being 13, 14, 15, looking at other people's highlight reels all the time. That's got to be tough. So I feel for them.
It's an interesting perspective because we're talking about the idea of storytelling today. It seems like, often when I think about the stories that we write, they're often written in private, right? And then we share them someday with other people like we're doing on the podcast right now. But often it seems like today there's a need to overshare, and it makes it very difficult to tell a story worth telling because everything has to be a highlight reel. You know what I mean? Like this is one thing I would love to start seeing on social media. What if people shared their losses? They shared the hard times. They shared the times when they're getting shit on. They share the times when people say no and slam doors in their face. What a beautiful world we would live in, because it would destigmatize taking L's, because people think that L's equal not winning, but L's are literally a prerequisite to you being able to win.
You put two L's together, you get a W.
Hey, okay. I love that.
Right?
That's very true.
I think there's this guy, I got to remember his name. I subscribe to his channel. He's like, everybody on social media is just talking about how nice the real estate market is and how much money they make. Let me tell you what I'm dealing with. And he's just like, we're in debt on this project. This person's not paying this project. Like I'm waiting for checks for the past 6 months. But he's like, we continue because we're entrepreneurs. And I was like, yo, I mess with you. Like, that's dope. But yeah, I think to your point here, I think we're talking about storytelling. Like, I think people overshare because they don't ask these really important questions. There's 4 questions, and I read about this in my book that I think people should be asking if you're going to tell any stories, especially in sales and just across the board. If you share stories as a means to build an audience or get in front of people, and not just for self-aggrandizement. And so I think the big picture thing people need to take into account if they're sharing a story is what's at stake for the audience. Like, why should they care? Like, what the hell is the reason? Like, yeah, if you're talking about like food you ate, like, okay, yeah, but why is it important? Have a big picture thing that you want to point people back to for why they should care about it. Think about like what happens if no action's taken, who's going to win, who's going to lose. Like, paint the picture as to why someone should pay attention to you. And then now we've at least got a framework for putting something out there. The second question people need to think about and ask is, what does your audience want to learn or achieve about that thing that's at stake? So what should they avoid? How should they think about this a little bit better? Are there steps they can take to succeed? right? Add value to it and show them something that they can use or put into effect in their own lives or businesses to be more prepared and more knowledgeable. And then the third thing to think about is where storytelling really lands very well is how do you want your prospect to feel? So label the emotion you're going for with the story. And like I love to couch this with some statistics as well. 95% of purchasing decisions are made subconsciously, which means the lizard brain is the first thing that knocks on the door and tells you that this is a good thing or not. And so if you're telling a story and you're oversharing, you're burning out that extra piece of emotion that would get somebody to potentially take some action with you. So be very clear about what you want people to feel and then how you're going to guide them into the final question, which is what do you want them to do next? Now that they know the information, now that you share this great story, what are you asking them to do? Subscribe, download Keenan's podcast and share it with all of your friends, book a call with our team, get a demo, whatever that thing is. If you don't tell people what to do next, now that they have this information, you've just wasted time telling the story. And that's not a good use of anybody's time.
Yeah, I mean, the intentionality of creating a call to action is something that's on the front of my mind now. I follow an individual, and I'm sure we've all heard of him. If you're into business and you're into entrepreneurship, you might have heard of Alex and Layla Hormozi. So they're very, blowing up right now in the entrepreneurship scene. And one of the biggest things of Alex talking about his growth of his podcast was all we did was ask. So what we started doing is we have a little interruption that says, hey, if you found value from this episode or you're an entrepreneur or you want to grow your business, go ahead and share this with one of your friends or come check out our website. Bing, just like that. And he's like, literally, that was the catalyst that helped us grow our audience because we were actually asking and telling people exactly what to do, which I feel like in itself is pretty simple, but also pretty amazing to kind of think about the impact of that type of stuff. But it's so simple. And when you kind of break it down like that, I want to kind of reverse a little bit. Why is storytelling so powerful? And how did you kind of get down this road in recognizing that stories were an amazing way to not only attract, retain, but also get people to take action?
Yeah, I love the question. So I've worked with probably the neighborhood of around 1,000 companies from 35 or so countries, mostly startups, people who are trying to sell and get their vision out into the world and have people buy the vision. And one of the consistent features I see, especially with sales teams, which is where I work, people just talk about the product. They talk about the widget. They talk about the coding. They talk about like all the stuff that went into making it. And that's not unimportant. But if I'm your prospect, I don't care, at least not yet. Like I care about the outcome that you're going to help me to get to. So there's a quote I love I think it's Theodore Levitt, who used to be a marketing professor, I want to say at Harvard. And he's like, people don't want to buy a drill. They want to buy a hole. So most people sell drills. But no, the right people sell the outcome that the drill is going to get you to. The drill is the vehicle that gets you to the hole that you want to drill. And so when I started seeing this across the board, it's like, y'all really suck at this. There's got to be a better way to explain it, right? Like you're not talking about this the right way. So I saw it was a persistent problem. That's the first. And then that just sat in my mind a little bit. And then I started doing some research, and it turns out 65% of information is retained when shared in the form of a story. So I could talk to you ad nauseum about the widgets that my platform does if I sell software. But if I tell you a story about Crystal and how her business was in shambles when she came to us, but by implementing our software, she was able to triple her revenue in three months, you probably remember that a lot faster than you would about any widget. So that's the first. The second thing is I love the creativity of storytelling. It's the most human thing. Like, not to talk about anybody's religions or anything else, but like some of the most famous books of all time contain some of the most famous stories of all time. Look at the Bible, look at the Quran, look at the Torah, look at other ancient texts. They deliver facts and lessons in stories. And there's a reason for that. It unlocks certain chemicals in our brain, and it builds trust and social proof without you having to tell me you're great. You can show me you're great by what you did for somebody else. And so I'm a big quotes guy. Another quote I love is, you need change only the story. You need change only the name, and you are the subject of the story. So if you're talking about results, great things that have happened, or bad things that have happened to you and you've surmounted them, I can then put myself in as the character and see and feel like I can achieve similar results. And that does all the selling you need. and at least creates a space to where you can then, when it's time, talk about the widgets that you built and how that widget is going to help with X, Y, and Z.
I mean, it's so powerful. One of the things that we do at my company, Francis, is we sell a proactive mental health service that is based on the psychology of something called an ecological momentary intervention. And what we do is we send you one daily text of positivity, encouragement, support throughout your day to interrupt your day in a positive way. But one of the most powerful ways in which I've been able to communicate this in our sales process is by telling a story. So what I talk about is where this technology and psychology came from was a guy named Jerome Motto. He was a soldier in World War II, deployed overseas like thousands of other Americans. He had an anonymous pen pal who wrote him letters of encouragement and positivity. Every single time he pulled into a new station, hand out a letter, blank. Here you go, Jerome. Who's it from? He doesn't know, but it's filled with messages of encouragement and support. We just want to see you come back home safe, Jerome. Come back home safe to us. We want to see you back home anyway. And then when he comes back from the war, he is so inspired by those little messages of positivity that he goes into the field of psychiatry, enters into an inpatient hospital to help people deal with the feelings of suicide ideation. Thinking about how those letters impacted him during the war, he had his nurses write handwritten letters to his patients who were discharged from the hospital. Years later, they went back and found that not a single person died by suicide who actually received those little handwritten letters. Now, what I could do is talk about the technology, the way in which we use text messages, all these other things, or I could tell you a story about somebody who was impacted by a little message of encouragement and get across the point. And that's one of the things I thought was so beautiful about kind of storytelling. And that was the first example in which I've actually used it in business that has helped us win that I couldn't really kind of crack the code before. And it was so interesting to me to see how people lit up when they're like, wow, that's an amazing story. And I totally get it. Wow, that's amazing. How do we do business with you guys? Instead of trying to force feed them the features and benefits of everything.
Yeah, I think that's, again, you've nailed it, completely nailed it. The services, the products, the software we sell are the vehicles to help people get to the outcomes they want for their lives or their businesses. And once you flip that on its head, you'll see, obviously, there's a story I should be telling about this that helps somebody see themselves as the character in the story and the outcome, right? Entrepreneurship is a hero's journey, right? If you really look at it for ourselves and then also for the people we want to affect, we want them to be heroes too. And heroes it's a classic story, and it just unlocks that thing in all of us that makes us feel attached to the outcome.
Can we break down the hero's journey a little bit? Because I feel like we have you in a captive moment to be able to really kind of talk about storytelling. And there's some other examples that I really want to kind of pull from the book as well. And so I'd love for you to kind of, gather your thoughts and then lead us through what the hero's journey means and kind of articulate it from the entrepreneurship perspective so our audience can kind of put themselves in, our seat and start telling their own story, if that makes sense.
Hero's journey is something that happens in 3 acts. It's by a guy named Joseph Campbell. He's the one who coined it. But the first act is the departure act, where the hero leaves the ordinary world. So if we're thinking about like entrepreneurs, that moment you were like, hey, you know what? I'm done with this 9 to 5. I want freedom. This act 2 is the initiation act, where the hero ventures into the unknown. That's where you start to really realize like, oh, this is harder than I thought, right? The challenges, and then you eventually become reborn as a champion because you realize you have certain abilities you didn't recognize. And the third act is the return act, where the hero returns triumphant. You've accomplished the goals and set out. So there's 12 different steps that happen in a hero's journey, and they are the following. The first is the ordinary world. This is where you establish what normal life looks like. So in the case of like a client testimonial story, it's what were they doing before they worked with you? The simplest way to do it. The next is the call to adventure, when you realize it's time to try something new. Then there's the refusal of the call, which is when you are like, maybe I shouldn't do this. You get those doubts into your head and into your mind. The fourth is you meet a mentor. Somebody or something pops into you and it's like, hey, you should actually try this. You should do this. You can do this. If we think in the frame for the Matrix, this is when he meets Trinity or Lawrence Fishburne's character. I'm blanking. What's his name?
Morpheus.
Morpheus. Thank you. He meets Morpheus. He gets a mentor. Someone's like, hey, you can do this. The next is crossing the first threshold. This is where you are actually trying out your abilities and seeing things. This is when Neo kind of jumps, right? And like he fails, but he's like, oh, there's something else out here. Then we go through tests, allies, and enemies. This is where you kind of get to test those abilities you think you have. You find out who your real friends are, and you find out who your friends aren't. And that takes a lot of failure and process. Then you get into the seventh step, which is approach the inmost cave. This is where you go into your head and you're just thinking about quitting and you hate it. And something about you decides to persist in what you're doing. And then you go through the eighth step, which is the ordeal, the big test. This is where maybe feel you're out of your league in this company you're pitching. And it's way more money than you've ever negotiated with for before, but you're just not sure about doing it. So you go through that. And then the ninth step is the reward. This is where you seize the sword and the hero realizes the biggest challenges and accomplishment they seek is within reach. Like you're at the negotiating table on this deal and it's going to happen. The 10th step is the road back. So this is the accomplishment is close and but it's way further than you still imagined, but your spirit is buoyed by the start of I can do this. I can really happen. It can really happen for me. And then the 11th step is the resurrection, and the hero rises to the occasion and becomes all the things they thought they could be. And then the final step is return with the elixir, which is where you come back victorious with that story to share, and potentially the chance to become a mentor to other people who are about to start on the same journey as you.
Man, I really want to pause here for a second, because if you are an entrepreneur, if you are somebody who is trying to build something for yourself, you can easily find yourself in those 12 steps. When we talk about that first step, right? When we're talking about the ordinary world, we've all found ourselves in the moment where everybody says, I'm in my 9 to 5, I'm unhappy here, and I know I can do something greater, but what am I going to do? And then we have the second step is that call to adventure and saying, I want to start my own business. And that's almost kind of like a form of uninformed optimism, if you will, about I'm going to start this business. I'm going to make things work. I can do whatever I want to do. This is going to be great. I'm going to be a millionaire. I'm going to be like Bezos, whatever it is. I'm going to be free, like I talked about a little earlier. And then we go through the process of really kind of meeting a mentor, somebody who's been there before, being able to kind of, be tested for the first time, going within, and we start finding the informed pessimism of like, this is going to be a lot tougher than what I thought. And then we go through these tests and we find ourselves almost rising as that hero of our own lives. And I feel like that is such an amazing ability to break that down into those 12 steps, because if you've been on this entrepreneurial journey, you've been through that yourself. So Stephen, where do you kind of find yourself in this process right now of your own hero's journey?
It depends on the day, bro. Some days I'm in the reward. I'm returning with the elixir. Other days, I feel like I'm just starting over. It's such a spectrum of emotions, this business game. But I'd say, generally speaking, I probably live in the innermost cave where I'm in my head a lot. The stories I tell myself are sometimes not as kind as I would like, but I think I'm moving towards the right direction. Because kind of as we talked
Yeah.
about in the beginning of all this, like there's always another goal. There's always another level to things. And I think I'm still working through what how to be patient, as we talked about at the start, and then also like where's that place where I'll be fulfilled. Because I also, one thing we're talking about social media and going back and forth. I think one of the biggest lies in social media is happiness. I think happiness is a
Mm.
complete lie, and I think that because what people are really searching for is fulfillment. Happiness is when you're hungry and you get that burger and you're like, oh man, this burger is delicious. But after the burger's gone, are you not happy now? Happiness is this fleeting dopamine infused social media concept, in my opinion, that doesn't last. Fulfillment lasts, and it comes through going through your own hero's journey and going through those challenges and building your self esteem by doing esteemable acts. So I think my place in the journey varies depending on the day, but largely speaking, I know the bigger, broader context of what I'm shooting for and why I'm doing it, which enables me to continue even when it gets tough.
Well, I just want to say, man, I'm, being a part of the entrepreneurship brotherhood, I understand exactly where you're at, because we all find ourselves in this exact moment. You know what I mean? And like, I
Definitely.
do a lot of thinking about the idea of happiness as an example. And I heard Alex Ramosi one time talk about very early in his life, he said, fuck happiness, because recognizing that I'm always going to be chasing this feeling that is fleeting is a recipe for long-term disaster, because every day is not going to be a good day. And it's okay not to be okay. And I feel like that's kind of where we can sprinkle in mental health to this conversation, because in itself, the entrepreneurial journey is really a kind of a testament of your fortitude. And every day is not going to be easy, but great things are often not easy. And that's why everybody is not great. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, man. I 100% agree with you. and putting it back in the forefront of mental health as well. I think that's another reason services like the one you have are super valuable, because everything else is pulling people in the opposite direction all the time. There's not that, hey, come back to normal and be like, yo, hey, like you got this, man. Like that's so rare. I think I have a few very close friends. I have a ton of acquaintances, but like there's few people that I can like actually properly talk to and then like get that real feedback from. And like when I get that encouragement from them, that can erase all the bad days I've had before. But so what I would say is, I think what you're doing is extremely valuable. It's really useful. And I think there needs to be more of it because people need that encouragement. They need it, especially right now.
I mean, I really appreciate that. I mean, my biggest thing is, coming from a biracial background, I realized that I have a larger responsibility to the people who came before me. My great grandfather was a sharecropper from Arkansas. My grandfather was born in the 1930s, was discriminated against because of the color of his skin, moved to Eastern Washington and raised a family there. My father was born into a household that was well below the poverty line with family members who battled drug addiction, alcohol abuse, and everything else. He was the first entrepreneur of my family to break that generational cycle. And when I think about the sacrifice that he's been through, being able to get us into a position where we could financially do different things, I realize that the biggest unlock that we still have to kind of break the shackles with is that mental framework. Being able to have conversations about mental health, being able to have conversations about how we're truly feeling is the biggest unlock that kind of will make us free. And I feel like that's something that I have a responsibility, if you will, to kind of try and accomplish during my lifetime because of all the people who came before me who didn't even have a shot to do that.
How do you do that outside of your company?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I've always tried to do is be a personification. I had a friend one time say, Keen, it's so cool that you've been able to kind of monetize who you are. You didn't have to try and do something different, but you figured out back in 2017, this is kind of my origin story, going back to storytelling. 2017, I'm 3 years into to starting my business, which is a telehealth business at the time. So in 2014, I saw an opportunity in the marketplace where there was going to be a need for this virtual connectivity with your doctor. And I was like, it's writing on the wall. It's clear as day. So I started going to these healthcare systems and saying, hey, we've got this video technology. What if you could have doctors come in on this device and they could not have to travel from hospital to hospital, but could do evaluations virtually with the nurses as their kind of extensions of their arms? Nobody believed in it. Spent years getting shit on because everybody's like, there's no way somebody wants to talk to their doctor virtually. It takes away from the patient experience. Our patients want to come into the facility. They want to see us. They want to sit in the waiting room for 45 minutes. They want to cancel all their appointments all day. They want to see the doctor for 5 minutes and then leave and be like, what the fuck did I just come here for? And so in 2017, I was in a really dark time, really challenged with my mental health. And I started saying, the only thing that I can control in this situation is how I look at the world. So what I'm going to do for myself is give myself a positive message every single day. I'm going to hop on Instagram and say, hey, it's day one. Here we're going to show up at and control everything that we can. Today's going to be a good day, all the way through 365 days. One thing that I discovered when I got to like day 37 is I had friends who started reaching out to me. And they say, hey, Keenan, you know what? I just watch your Instagram story every single day. And it's actually really helped me. I look forward to it when I'm done with work. When I wake up in the morning, I'm always looking for that story. Thank you for being that voice of encouragement. And in that moment, I realized I'm not the only person who needs a message of encouragement, but it seems like everybody else does as well. Flash forward to 2021, we started the Brand of Francis to leverage those EMIs, the story that I talked about, and started utilizing these text messages to be able to be the interruption that gets you back into the moment of appreciation. Because one thing I know about humans is we are very reactionary. We are not proactive about searching for things like mental health. It takes a bad experience to put us in the situation where we say, okay, I really need help now. And if we can kind of get ahead of that by being proactive and interrupting your day with a message of encouragement and support, maybe that's a way to start the conversation within our own head that could then turn into a conversation like this. And that's kind of the story of what we do.
I love that too. And the other thing is positivity adds positivity. So I get a nice message. I can then feel more comfortable and give somebody a compliment and share that positivity. And it's a virtuous cycle. So definitely see the value there, man. I love that. I really love that.
Yeah, brother. It's really interesting. I just think that we need to have more conversations like this, because when we have conversations like this and we talk about the ability for us to tell our own story, to find ourselves in the story of the hero's journey, if you will, being able to understand that we are the narrator of our own story, I
Yes.
feel like is something that more people need to kind of lean into, because it seems like so much of life is unpredictable. It's more negative than ever, and it's very difficult to control. I want to kind of talk about your ability to control your story. So we're in New York. We talked about your origin story of spilling that 55-gallon drum of oil into the bar. You realize this is all I've got, but this is going to be a part of my story. You then make the move to Mexico. How did this happen, and why did this happen?
Yeah, great question, man. So in between that time, so from oil spill, I finally got a job in the construction business doing infield inspections, half in the office. Almost died. I'll tell you about that a little bit. Then from there, I was like, hey, I realize I'm gonna die one day. I want to, if I'm gonna die, I want to at least have gone towards something I want. And I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so I got a job in sales, and like at the bottom of the barrel, because the entrepreneur mindset here is if you can sell and you have a sales, you'll always have a business. That's kind of the mentality there. So I was like, this is a good skill to learn. So I did that for a few years, and then got let go from that company because they were on hard times, and got started a remote job, my first remote job. I'd always wanted a remote job. And when I got that job, they'd hired a consultant to work with me as I built out sales, who was a super dope guy, still friends with him today, still like a mentor to me. And then after about 7 months, we were out of business because Facebook had changed the algorithm. So I
Mm.
lost 2 jobs in 1 year, and I was just kind of out on my own. But I wrote a note to this consultant, and I was like, hey, thank you so much for your help. Just let you know I got let go, but you've been a huge help to me. I look forward to working with you again at some point, wherever I land. And very kindly, this guy gets back to me and he says, hey, maybe we should hop on a call. Maybe I can help you figure out what's next. And I was like, bet, let's go. We book a half an hour. 3 hours later, we finished the call. And at the end, he's like, hey, I got a job for someone like you if you want it. So next thing you know, that's how I got into consulting. The job was fully remote, and he was super encouraging to be like, hey, like, results are results. I don't care where you are. Go explore wherever the hell you want. Like, as long as you make your calls and you're doing your thing, I don't care where you are, which is the right mentality, I think, which I had a lot of struggles with in previous jobs. So from there, I just started going around the world for places I was curious about. Lived in Germany, lived in Mexico, lived in Ecuador and Peru, went over to Thailand, just exploring any place I was curious about because I could. People thought I was nuts. You're like, you're where? Why? Why would you go there? How are you doing this? I was like, they got internet here too, which is what you're doing in the
Yeah.
office, right? Like, you're sitting in the office using the internet to talk to your colleagues on Slack, not in person. So like, I don't know. I thought it was a silly concept, but fast forward 2019, I brought my parents down here for Thanksgiving, and I was like, hey, this is where I'm going to move, Mexico City. It's like, I love it here. I wanted to show them. Like, it's not a crazy place. My parents loved it as well. And then we all know 2020 happened. So 2020, again, my story is not a unique story in that I think everybody had some very tough times during that time period. And I've always had a tough relationship with New York. It's so full on, nonstop, and increasingly impersonal, to the point where when you're locked inside your apartment and can't go outside and there's no trees around, it just starts to become this extremely heavy and quite depressing place. And so in around July of 2020, it became very clear to me that we were just not going to be back to quote unquote normal for a very long time. And I started extrapolating this out. The only thing I was able to do was ride a bike. So I would just be out on my bike all day. And I remember riding one time. It was one of those random cold days in the summer. Like, I had to wear a jacket in July. And I was like, oh, snap. I won't be able to ride my bike when it gets cold. I won't even be able to do this. And I was like, something's got to be different. And so I hit up one of my friends who was living in Mexico. And like, he's like, dude, you don't look great. Like, you should come down here. And I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah, come down here. It's cheaper. It's nicer. The beach is here, and you could just wait it out. And if you want to go back to New York, go back to New York. And I was like, you got something here. So I just blew everything up. And I was very clear for me for a couple of reasons. I hit up all the smartest people I knew. And I was like, hey, here's where I'm at. I don't have any debt. I paid off all my student loans. I'm running my own business. I don't have any kids. I don't have a mortgage. Like, what would you do? And they're like, I don't know. I'm just waiting it out. So it was very clear that it was up to me, whatever I decided to do. No one had any advice for me. And so when I come back to this for entrepreneurs, why that's relevant to you guys is most of the time you can get some good advice from some really trusted sources, but at the end of the day, you have to write your own story. And so when I extrapolated things out, I was like, I'm not going to do well here in the winter. I already don't. I really don't like New York winter. But if I can't even go outside and go do stuff, it's going to be a hard day. And so I blew everything up. I sold everything that I could sell, and I moved to Mexico, where I've been for 4 years now.
I mean, my hat goes off to you, man, for that, because, one of the things that I often talk about with my girlfriend, so she's in the process right now of going through medical school. And I'm not throwing shade towards anybody, but she's the first graduate from college in her family. She's the first graduate to go to medical school. She's the first person to do all of these things. And one time we were having a conversation. Yeah, I'm sure she'll appreciate that. One time we were having a conversation about taking advice from people in our close circle. It's very difficult to take advice from people about things that they've never done or never even thought were possible. And I feel like that is a lot of the entrepreneurship journey. Is you can listen to people, like you said, who are trusted in your circle, which is great. But often you do have to be the narrator and the writer of your own story, because nobody's going where you're going. And so being able to trust in yourself is a huge element. Did you ever have some of those waffling moments of back and forth? Like, I don't think that this is good, or what's that mindset like?
Dude, I'll get very, very vulnerable with you right now. I went back to my parents' house. Thankfully, I have both my parents. They're still married. Today's their anniversary. Shout out 44 years to
Congrats.
my parents. Still ticking. Talked to both of them today. Love mom and dad. Shout out to you guys. They were super supportive of my move. They didn't like it because it was very strange times. Like, they didn't know what would happen. But I explained to them, I was like, hey, like, I won't do well here. I already see it. This is causing me problems. And so my dad dropped me off at the airport. I put my bags on the carousel, and then I'm waiting to get on the plane. I get on the plane, and then we start taxiing and we take off. And I was like, holy shit, I may never see anybody again. Like, nobody knows what's happened at this time. I could die. Anything could happen, right? And I was just like, I just started crying my face off. Like, I covered myself with my hat, and I was like, man, like, you're really betting on yourself right now. Like, you don't know what's going to happen here. Like, you're going to a whole new country. You don't know how long you'll be there, whatever. Like, just all that was like so present in me. Like, it was, I probably cried for like 15, 20 minutes, just silently, because I'm a man
Yeah,
with my hat over
exactly.
my head, but just, to myself. And then I was like, in some ways I think about it, like, it's a little grave way to say it, but it's like, kind of, in some ways I died on the way. Like, my old life is completely gone. Like, I got rid of all of it. I had to completely start over. I had to find new apartments, had to make new friends, had to figure out how to navigate the world in a more digital way. And I'm a much more of an in-person guy. It was a very tough transition. But again, I think I was very fortunate, first and foremost, that I could do that. Number one, like, I built enough of a business that I could take it somewhere with me, which is a blessing, huge blessing, even as hard as it is. And as hard as that year was. Second thing is, I had some friends who I trusted enough to follow their advice, right? Who was like, yo, you need to get out of there. It's not working for you. And someone who will just tell you, like, you're messing up, you're fucking up right now, right? That's really important to have. And then thirdly, I was able to heal a lot because I was like at the beach. I was around less people. It was like nice weather. And like, I could go swim in the ocean in the morning when I wasn't feeling good. And like, over, 6 months, a year and a half, and then eventually 2 years, like, I got myself back to some version that I recognized, even with all the crazy times we were all in. But I think that's the best decision I ever made. It was one of the hardest. I took a lot of shit for it from people. People thought I was crazy. They talked behind my back. They hated on me for it. But again, like, at the end of the day, you got to do what works for you, and you got to walk your path. And I think one of the things for any entrepreneur listening to, you got to be able to ask yourself those really hard questions. And I didn't want to ask those questions. They confronted me. I don't regret having to have answered those questions. But I think the path I'm on now, I would not have been able to be on had I not had to ask those questions of myself. So I'd say lean into the tough stuff. And on the other side of that is gold, tons and tons of gold.
It's really inspiring to hear, and I almost got a little bit emotional in that process of I did get emotional and hearing you kind of talk about, because in some of those scariest moments of life, we almost have to kill the old version of ourselves in order to create space for the new version. And I always think about this. I have this analogy that I talk about with my girl all the time. It's like, in order for us to become the new version of ourselves, part of us has to die, because we only have so much capacity inside of us, right? If you think you're a 50-50 split of like the old version of me and the new version of me, if you want to be the new version of you, that old version of you has to die and has to be pushed down. And that's a scary process, because a lot of our self-recognition, a lot of our stories that we tell ourselves are rooted in that old version of yourself. But I'll go back to the saying I said a little earlier: what got you here won't get you there.
Won't get you there. There's a quote on that too. One of my friends shared with me. He says, "Where you are green, you grow. Where you are ripe, you rot."
Mm.
And so in certain places you're way too ripe. It's time to get it going and clip a new branch so that you can get to the next phase of whatever that is for yourself.
What do you think the biggest process of your maturation has been as an entrepreneur and as a person in whole, in kind of getting away from everything? Because this concept is really interesting to me. I listened to a story one time where Alex Ramosi, to go back to him, was talking about why I don't go back home for the holidays. And he was talking about, a lot of people go back home for the holidays, but what you find yourself in is a situation where people speak an old version of you upon yourself that no longer exists. Steven, you're so emotional. Steven, you drink so much. Steven, you do all this kind of stuff. You've always been the partier. You were never good at school, blah, blah, blah. And it's like at some point in time, we have to be able to kind of cut those stories off because that person doesn't exist anymore. And so I want to kind of know your process about your maturation. But also, you mentioned some things that are important in that little story you were telling about you killing the old version of yourself. Is people talk shit. People talk behind your back. How was that kind of process for you as you were becoming this new version of yourself?
I mean, it was difficult, man. Like that whole 2020, 2021 years were just some of the hardest for me as a person, for me with family and friends, for me in business, everything. It was just such an adjustment. And in some ways, I'm still figuring out what happened there, right? Like what a strange time for all of us. For me, it actually became quite simple. If you were talking shit about me moving, you're out. You're of no use to me. You didn't even bother to try to get any context. So bye. For like my close friends, they understood and they like talked to me. And I did like a pre-test before completely. I didn't know I was going to move, but my pre-test was in April of 2020. I was so annoyed with all of the negative energy that was happening around the pandemic stuff that I just said, hey, I'm turning my phone off. Turned my phone off and I was like, I'm not going to use it for a day. At the end of the day, I felt better and I was like, let's see how long we could go. And I went for a month, no phone. Didn't get a single text message, didn't go on any social media besides LinkedIn because that's more business, or it was back then anyway. And I was just like, I'm out. And I read like 10 books. I finished all these projects. I was super focused. I was getting in great shape. Everything was working great. And I didn't tell anybody I did this. And what's interesting about that, and I don't necessarily recommend it, but I'd love to get to a place where I could just get off of the phone for a month or more, because it changes the way you move in the world. The world becomes more present to you. And I think that's a gift we can all give to people and to everything else. But it was interesting to see people who were like, yo, I text you, I called you. And then they would contact my brother or contact my parents, be like, yo, is he okay? Where's he at? Those are the real people who were like, yo, are you all right? And it was like 4 people out of the hundreds and hundreds of people that I would know or be texting with or checking on. And I was like, yeah, y'all are out. So I think it was a lot of purging people it was very clear. It's like, yo, there's nothing here. And I'm the one who's keeping this relationship up. And that's a funny thing with being someone who works in sales. Like, that's my job. I keep in touch with people. I ask questions, whatever. But like most of these people I was talking to, they never even checked on me. They never asked, how you doing? Do you want to hop on a call? And like the 5 people that did are still some of my best friends to this day. So that's one piece. And I think on top of that, once you kind of delete a lot of like old stuff, you get rid of the dead leaves, the dry leaves, you start to open yourself up for new experiences and new people. And in moving to Mexico, there was another business group that I became a part of, which has become one of the best decisions I've ever made. And you start to get around people who are of mind as you are. So like, right, you said earlier, entrepreneurship is a mirror, right? And when you can get around other people who have better views of themselves in the mirror, the way you look at yourself in the mirror can change. And so I say my biggest maturation is joining groups that have other entrepreneurs who are way further ahead of me, who I can sit down with and like talk to, right? So as a quick example, I have a pretty close friendship with a guy whose business makes 8 figures a year. Another guy who has about $1 billion of assets under management, who texts me, and I know his mother, I know his daughter and his family, and like he sends me referrals. I would never get access to this person if I wasn't in a group, because I showed up as myself and I was like, hey, I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I'm here to learn. And people saw that I'm adding value in that way and I'm not trying to take from them. And that's been life changing, life changing. But I'd say the biggest maturation is pay to get in front of groups that you don't feel you're qualified in, because a rising tide does lift all boats, and people who are way ahead of you, they don't want to give you anything for free, but the first investment you make is being part of their group. They're going to take a chance with you because you've already crossed the first threshold of proving that you're at least willing to pay to be there. And that's probably the biggest in my entrepreneurship journey so far.
I mean, that's a huge element. One of the things that I feel like from a networking perspective, I see a lot of the social media current, if you will, that kind of is willing to talk shit on others, meaning we're going to talk about, how bad you're doing and stuff like that. But one reminder for everybody who's in the entrepreneurship game is nobody who is ahead of you is going to waste time by trying to talk shit on you.
Yes.
It's only the people who are behind you who are going to try and throw stones at you and try and pull you back towards them. And that's one of my biggest things as well. It's like when you get around other people who have been successful and have been where you're trying to get to, they are so much more willing to be that mentor for you. Stage 4 in our hero's journey, meeting the mentor, they are always willing to help you in those situations. And so my biggest piece of advice as well is get around people who are more successful than you. And if you're humble enough to say, I don't know everything, but I want to get like you guys, you'd be amazed at the reciprocation, if you will, that people are willing to give you, because like you said, a rising tide lifts all ships. It's just an amazing little mentor, or a little metaphor, if you will, that is such a cheat code to kind of get around people who are way ahead of you.
Yeah, I wish I knew that in my 20s, man. Oh, dude. Like the amount of money I just wasted on booze and like thinking I would be a millionaire versus actively getting in front of groups of people. Like I can't tell you how jealous I get when I'm at conferences and like there's a 22-year-old building a business in the same room that I'm in. I'm like, dude, you're going to be so successful. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Right. Like
I've got a couple friends who are younger guys, and they're like 20, 21 years old, and they're building businesses. And they're like, so what should we do to be like you when you're like, we're your age? I'm like, guys, I'm 33 years old right now. You've got 12 years of time in the game and experience that you're going to be able to have. So by the time you're my stage or my age, you're going to be so much further ahead of me. It's just time in the game and the reps that you get.
it's reps. It's all reps. And I think that right there, Keenan, that is the cheat code. I think you spark something else inside of my mind here where you're like, what's the biggest maturation? It's obviously what I mentioned, but the second one was think in longer time horizons. So at 20, it's like, yo, I got to be rich today. I got to go to the club today. I got to show people today. Everything's right now, or maybe a month in advance. Versus now, like at the age I'm at and like the people I've been around, it's like, no, think about this as at least a 5-year thing, if not a 10-year thing. And when you do it that way, the tough day-to-day stuff doesn't really matter as much because it's like I'm on the way here. And so like if you could think in a longer time horizon, it just becomes so much easier to do all the hard stuff because you're like, yeah, I'm on the way here. And I think of the statistics I read, if you work on something for 5 years, you're in the top 10% of whatever it is. If you do it for 10, you're in the top 1%. And like that's not conjecture, that's factual. So just like success is inevitable when you start to add longer time horizons. And I wish I knew that at 20, but here we are.
Man, that's been one of my biggest things as well. It's like I continue to think about, if I think on things of longer time horizons, like the quickest way. I went to a business conference the other day. It was really cool because they had us do an exercise, and they're like, all right, guys, you have 10 minutes to build the tallest tower out of noodles, string, and tape. Go ahead, see what you got. And then everybody built their tower, yada, yada. Everybody's shit fell down, classic. And they're like, so what would you do? And instead of 10 minutes, if we gave you 2 days to build your tower, what would you do differently? And everybody said, well, I would have built a wider base. I would have made sure that my foundation was better. I would have done this type of stuff. And they say, exactly. So think about your business in the same way. The quickest way to build a business to $1 million is not the quickest way to build a business to $100 million. You need the foundation, and you have to take your time. And I thought that was a really interesting insight because over the last years, like I said, I've been thinking about that longer time horizon, and it gives you the air cover to also fuck up.
Yes.
You know what I mean? When you're thinking about, if I want to be successful by 2033, then I've got a lot of time to test, tinker, and do different stuff here to figure it out instead of putting that pressure on ourselves. And I feel like a lot of that pressure we put on ourselves is really kind of self-inflicted more so than anybody else.
Oh, dude, I'm so mean to myself sometimes. Some of the things that like I call her Alice, right? So this is a little trick for entrepreneurs too. This may be helpful for somebody. We all have that voice in our head that's telling us to not do something, telling us not to go to the gym, telling us that we're not good enough, whatever that is. I've given it a name so that it's something else that's not me. And so when I get that voice in my head of Alice just telling me all this stuff, first thing to acknowledge is it's trying to protect me in a way. But I can be like, hey, thanks, Alice. I got this covered. So I can other it and it's outside of me in some way. The next thing is like, I go to the gym or I'll go do something physical. I get out of my head and get back into my body and in doing something I can control. Because right, like you get an email from someone's like, oh, we're not going to move forward with the deal like I did yesterday. It's like,
Same.
okay, all right. I want to respond like, oh, what the hell? Like you just said you needed this. And then it's like, nope, let me go somewhere else, come back with a fresh mental, and then I can write an appropriate response to this thing. So I think it's those type of tricks and like knowing your own self enough, knowing the stories you tell yourself to be able to move away from the negativity that's invariably going to be there, and then having devices and things you can do to get yourself back into a positively charged environment. And that can make a huge difference.
I mean, I love that. I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that. There's a really cool book that I read back in 2020. It was called The Untethered Soul. And the untethered soul gives the analogy of that internal voice being the roommate. Because if you can observe that voice talking, that means you are not that voice. And I feel like it's really important to recognize at some point in time, someone, something, some instance put that negative voice in your head, and you realize that eventually you start thinking that it was yourself. And the great example, because everybody who's watching the podcast, you have a couch behind you. The analogy in the book is, imagine if you sat down with that inner voice and they were your roommate, but they were really sitting on the couch next to you. You're watching a video or a movie, and as soon as it starts, you go, did I switch the laundry? That little voice says, did we make sure that we put everything on the grocery list? Did we send that email? You would be like, dude, shut the fuck up, voice. You know what I mean? As that little voice. And so being able to kind of create that separation, if you will, is super important because, yes, you're right. That Alice voice in itself is not you. It's a voice that we hear and we observe. And being able to control that and create that distance as the observer, I feel like is really important for people to kind of just really hammer home, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, man. Everything is a mindset. When I hang out with folks who are really making like real money, the thing they cite most is the work they've done on their mindset. That's what's helped them level up. Because we create these stories about ourselves that we're maybe not worthy about certain things, or we're not capable, we don't know enough, or we need to read another 10 books in order to get to that level of knowledge to be able to apply to things. And probably you don't, first and foremost. And then second thing is you just don't have the right mindset about it. And I think that's the constant maturation that this entrepreneurship journey allows for and requires. And I think it's a fun problem to solve. And I'm enjoying it even on the days that I'm not, because of what the totality of the long-term thinking has been very useful.
Well, I mean, I really believe in that, man. And as we kind of start landing the plane here on the episode, I want to touch on a couple things. One is the objective of you as an entrepreneur and the CEO of your own life is to be able to cast a vision for the future. And one of the things that I love from your book was the example of Steve Jobs and how he cast a vision for what the personal computer was going to be. Can you kind of give us a high level explanation of how he cast a vision for what the personal computer would be as an example? And then we can kind of talk about our personal lives and how we cast a vision for ourselves as well.
Yeah. So everybody knows Steve Jobs, rest in peace, founder of Apple. And there's a guy, I learned about this story for this, one of the early programmers, I believe. His name is escaping me now, but he was going and interviewing at many different companies that were in the computer space because he saw this was going to be a big revolutionary thing. And he went to the first company, I think it was Gateway Computers, and they were like, oh, we're expecting our shares to rise from $1 to $2 in the next year, which, again, that's not bad, but it's not very inspiring. He went to a second company, and they were like, oh, we think we can sell a lot of these, which, again, is cool, but uninspiring. And then when the guy got with Steve Jobs just laid it out, and he was like, hey, this is going to change the way you educate your children. This is going to change the way we do commerce. This is going to change the way the economies run. Do you want to be a part of that? And obviously much more in depth, but the way he would just continue to tell the story was like, this is a huge thing. It's earth changing. Do you want to be a part of this? And so what I say to any entrepreneur, having your vision properly outlaid, and again, this is not an easy thing, so I don't want to front like, oh, you'll just have it in 10 minutes. But having your vision is what enables people to come towards you. The larger your vision is, the more attention it's going to get. And the more people are going to say, hey, I want to lend my skills, talent, and abilities to helping that vision become something. So the Steve Jobs example is a perfect way. If you look into it, the way he was able to paint the big picture the outcome that he believed this stuff would go towards helped a lot of people say, you know what, I'm going to work with this guy, even if he is a complete narcissist and a sociopath. I want to be a part of this big vision because I see big things that can happen from it.
I know there was another example that I heard one time. It was Jeff Bezos saying, be solid on the vision, but flexible on how you get there. And I think in the entrepreneurial journey and in life itself, we have to be flexible on the roads that we take, the detours, the twists, the turns, the pivots. But as long as we're moving in the same direction towards that North Star, we'll find ourselves being successful. I want to give you an opportunity to kind of paint out the picture of what is Steven Steers' vision for himself. If we could kind of just like narrate for the future. So when we look back on this in, let's call it 10 years, we'll be able to kind of see where we've been at.
My vision, my big vision is I want to own a bunch of businesses. I want to build a holding company. So I'm a consultant, and I think the fastest path to cash flow and capital to build a war chest to invest in businesses is consulting, which is the kind of the thing, something I'm good at and I enjoy doing. And I don't have to work too crazy hours to make decent money. And then I want to take that and buy businesses. And then once I have a series of businesses that are cash flowing and breaking me off with enough cash to fund my lifestyle, I intend to just write a lot more books. I love writing books. It's a hard process, but I've really, really enjoyed the discipline it required for that. So I'd like to do more of that. And then quite frankly, in between then and there, like part of my mission and vision for why I do what I do right now is like, I want to be the help I didn't have. So when I started in sales, got no training from anybody. That's not a flex. And it hindered my career for a number of years until I did get the training. And so what I'm doing now is to be that person for folks who are in positions where they're not trained and maybe they're not as successful as they could be because people aren't investing in there. So I'd like to put an end to founders who hire people and don't train them. That's my big, big vision. How about you?
I have a very similar vision to you, man. I'm trying to build a business that allows for me to be able to have a wide-reaching impact. When we first started our company back in 2014, we were a telehealth company that really focused on hardware, building hardware systems and solutions and putting them in places. One thing I recognize is that we were kind of bottlenecked by the time and the ability for us to travel to go put these things in places. In 2019, we started developing software that gives me kind of that global scalability to be able to kind of provide value no matter where we're located. It's a very interesting time to kind of be an entrepreneur in this space, especially in the near years after the pandemic, because we can work from anywhere. And being able to have a solution that gives us the ability to reach our customers and provide value on a daily basis is something that I'm super pumped for. But I'm really trying to create a legacy. I want to do right by the people who came before me, and I want to put my future lineage in a situation where they have opportunity to make good decisions when it comes to their finances, but also the education that they pursue. And the education is not just the things that we learn out of books or on YouTube, but more so how we kind of manage our internal self. Because if you have the validation of knowing who you truly are, then nobody can really kind of break that seal for you. There's a saying, it's like water doesn't sink ships. It's the water that gets inside
the ship
that sinks ships.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so if you can kind of create that seal for yourself to kind of protect yourself from all the negativity and everything else that swirls around you, I feel like you have the ability to do amazing things. As we kind of wrap here, Stephen, I want to give you an opportunity to plug the book. So Superpower Storytelling.
Yes, sir.
Where can people find it? I'm going to put it in the description to this episode as well, so people can go find it wherever it's located. But kind of tell us a little bit more about why that was important and why people should go check it out.
Yeah. First off, before anything else, man, thank you very much for having me here. If anybody's interested in the book, you get it on my website, stevensteers.com, or at Amazon if you like. The reason I wrote the book is because I saw this as a persistent problem in a lot of the conversations I was having with founders. They're selling products. They're not selling outcomes. And so the whole point of the book is to give you some tactical things that you can actually put into your business immediately that will help you tell better stories and leverage better stories inside of that context. And so part of my mission, my vision, and my general thing is sales is a 4-letter word for a lot of people. People hate salespeople. I think that is a very well-earned thing, right? A lot of salespeople are terrible because they push things on people and they don't ask questions and unlock and open doors for people. So I wrote the book in an effort to help sales become something that people may like, may even find fun and enjoy and re-inspire and reinvigorate themselves with. So if you're curious about some ways you can tell better stories, some example stories that you can use, I think the book could be a good use for you. And I had a lot of fun writing it, and it is a very easy and simple read. So I hope you enjoy it. And if you do read it, I would appreciate a review, and I would happy to meet you on LinkedIn or otherwise.
Awesome, man. Where they can find you on LinkedIn?
Steven Steers. I'm the guy with the big hair. Big hair will help you get bigger profits.
There we go, man. Well, for everybody who's been tuning in here today, Steven Steers, once again, thank you for being an amazing storyteller and showing us a little bit about your story today. Because I know if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a founder, if you're somebody who's trying to get things in life, they found a lot of their story in ours, in which we shared today. And I just want to say once again, man, thanks for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, man. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. Catch you in the next one.